Well, it is good to be with you this morning. Happy Sunday. This morning we are continuing our it's not new anymore. We're continuing our series in James, where we are looking at these essential teachings for every Christian. And what's cool about the book of James, and some of you maybe haven't read this in a while, and maybe this sermon series has gotten you back into the book of James. But what we find in James is some incredibly practical teachings, some pretty practical, everyday ways to live our lives that challenge us to look and to live more like Jesus. And so that's why James is such an intriguing thing to look at. There was a movie that came out, I think it was last year, and it's titled The Darkest Hour. And some of you may have seen this film. It's a story of Winston Churchill's leadership in the United Kingdom, in Great Britain, during the dark days of World War II, when Adolf Hitler was on his way to completely just take over all of Europe, and on his way marching west with the desire to take over Western Europe towards England as well. And so Churchill had formed a war cabinet that comprised of both parties of Parliament to work together to deal with the threat of Hitler's advancing army. And there were many people in Churchill's war cabinet that saw that all of Europe would soon be lost. That there was nothing that the UK, that Great Britain could do to stop Hitler's westward attack. They didn't believe that England had the power or the ability to do anything to resist Hitler's advancement. And so there were many people, a part of Churchill's war cabinet, who really believed that England should enter into peace talks with Hitler, under the assumption that certainly, as a grounds to peace, that certainly Hitler would be rational with the UK and would naturally want to uphold uphold some of these ideas and some of these demands by the UK if they were to surrender leadership to Hitler. Wisdom is defined as the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment. Winston Churchill was wise in his decisions as they related to dealing with Hitler, despite the tremendous odds that surrounded him, despite the opinions of those in Parliament that wanted to encourage him towards peace negotiations. Churchill knew that based on his own experience, based on his own study, his own involvement with world leaders, that you cannot reason with a dictator. A dictator got to be a dictator because they have a certain set of values, which is domination over other people. To assume that surrender would have been favorable for a nation like England would have been foolish and was foolish. The only course of action, according to Churchill, was to do everything that we can to stop Hitler. That is the only choice that we have. And if we die trying, it's better than living under a Hitler-controlled UK. And Churchill's decision to not surrender or enter into peace negotiations, as well as the attack on Pearl Harbor and pushing the United States into war with both Japan and Germany, these collection of events that occurred were major points in the war, the turning points in the war against Hitler's Germany. Churchill was known to be a wise leader because of his decisions, despite what others were maybe telling him or what may have looked to be true on the surface. Now, what's interesting is if we go back to the definition for wisdom, we don't see any morality tied toward this definition. Let's go back and look at it. Wisdom is defined as, maybe I didn't put it on the screen. Did I, Greg? Maybe not. Wisdom is defined as the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment. You see, there's no morality in that definition. You could say, well, good judgment. Well, good is really subjective in terms of this definition. You see, Hitler was a wise leader. His war methods were very wise. They were very experienced. He had a lot of knowledge, and he had good judgment on what needed to take place in order to assume control over other nations. You see, wisdom is not necessarily tied to morality, although it should be. It's not. You can have wise dictators. You can have wise politicians. You can have wise Christians. You can have wise Satanists. You can have wise athletes and wise coaches, wise businessmen and women. The list goes on and on. All that's required for wisdom is to have knowledge, experience, and good judgment within whatever the context is, good or bad, of what that person is engaged in, what they're trying to accomplish. There's a lot of wise people in this world, but not many who are wise in the right things. James talks about wisdom in James chapter 3. And he talks about the reality that supports this idea of morality tied to wisdom. And he talks about there being two different types of wisdom in this world. James is basically going to define wisdom in these two ways. He's going to say there is something known as worldly wisdom, and there's something known as godly wisdom. That is, using our definition of the word wisdom, there is a worldly knowledge, experience, and judgment for making decisions. And there is a godly knowledge, experience, and judgment in making decisions. So let's take a look at this short passage in James 3, starting at verse 13. We'll be looking at verses 13 to 18 this morning. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such quote-unquote wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is from the earth. It is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. You see, James defines earthly or worldly wisdom as the knowledge, experience, and practice of living lives of envy and selfish ambition. Do you see the connection there? He draws worldly wisdom towards the attributes, towards the morality-based ways of living that are associated with envy and selfish ambition. You see, envy and selfish ambition are the qualities that motivate and give shape to how one lives their life on a day in and day out basis, and is therefore considered to be the world's wisdom. Meaning, envy and selfish ambition form the basis for one's life system, whereby most decisions are consciously, or this is important, or are very unconsciously made with this foundation of support in place. Envy and selfish ambition is the foundation of worldly wisdom. And therefore, decisions are consciously or unconsciously made in our lives based on that founding principle. And making those decisions based on that foundation leads people to think and make judgments on what is wise or what is not wise based on the foundation that they're operating from. Now, for example, I would say that the way of thinking that values business and making money over trust and loyalty in personal relationships to be an example of worldly wisdom. This worldly wisdom shows up when someone is betrayed in the name of business. You've heard the phrase, it's not personal, it's business, right? This language is used to justify a worldly way of operation that values decision-making based on envy and selfish ambition over trust and loyalty to people and relationships. Would Jesus ever say it's not personal, it's business? No, he wouldn't. Because Jesus operates from a different foundation of what is considered to be right and wrong and wise in the way we live in this world. A professional athlete would probably genuinely believe that his or her refusal to play because they don't think they're being paid enough money is justified. After all, it's not personal, it's business. But said athlete's teammates feel the brunt of this worldly wisdom when the whole team suffers because only one member is thinking about him or herself. Right? The team gets pretty upset. Maybe some of you have seen some of this in the media this week. Well, let's pause for a moment and clearly define and understand these primary values of earthly wisdom. He uses the word here, envy. Envy is a feeling of discontented or resentful longing aroused by someone else's possessions, qualities, or luck. You see somebody that has something that you want that you don't have, or that you wish you had, or you wish to find you. And so you are unhappy with yourself, you are unhappy with what you possess and who you are, and you wish that I could have what that person has, whether it's their possession, their money, their position, their traits, their talents, whatever it may be. Oh, and the added negative aspect of envy is a lot of times that's associated with that other person's own downfall. I hope their life is destroyed and I get the benefits of their life. Selfish ambition is being devoted to or caring about oneself only, concerned primarily with your own interests, benefits, and welfare, regardless of other people. So you can see how envy and selfish ambition work off of each other, right? When you're envious, it leads to expressions of selfish ambition. I want what that person has. I'm going to do everything in my right and my ability to get it. If that means running over people in the process, it's not personal, it's business, right? I will do that to get what I need, to preserve my company, to preserve my standard of living, to preserve what I value and what I think is the expectation that I have for what I should have for myself. This is earthly wisdom, the knowledge and experience and practice of either being discontented with who you are and what you have, envy, or being overly absorbed with yourself, looking to please yourself over care for others, selfish ambition. And much of our world, if we're honest, is fueled and driven by these realities. Much of business today is fueled by these realities. Much of politics today is fueled by these values and realities. Much of our relationships are fueled by these values. Much of everyday life is fueled by these values. James says that these quote-unquote wise values, these earthly wisdom values, lead to disorder and evil practices in the world. Did you see that? It leads to disorder and evil practices in the world. The worldly wisdom of envy and selfish ambition is what creates chaos, disorder, injustice, and disregard for human life in the world. That's where it starts. When you see injustice, when you see disregard, where it's likely coming from is a foundational principle of worldly wisdom established in characteristics and traits in a human's life towards envy and selfish ambition. You could probably look at any horrific event in the history of the world that we know and start walking it back and tracing the origins and find that at the foundation. Envy and selfish ambition. Let me give you one other example. A friend of ours from our kids' middle school was telling Cheryl about a conversation she had with another mom from the school. And this other mom was really upset with the changes to the ethnic diversity of the school over the past year. You see, there's another school in our school district that had recently shut down. And the children, a part of that other school, many of them in that other school come from lower socioeconomic families. And that school had shut down, and so a lot of those students from those other schools, or that other school, they've been sent to different schools in the area. And so our local middle school had received some of the students from the shut down school. And this woman was very upset about the quote-unquote Mexicans taking over our school, as she said. She also went on to say, I paid top dollar to buy a house in this area, and I wasn't planning on this. And this is right on the border of San Jose, Campbell, and Saratoga. And the school that we go to services all of those communities. There's definitely a little different feel about people that live in certain zip codes, about what they deserve, the money they paid for their house, and what they expect to receive in education. Cheryl and I have actually been quite appalled at some of the conversations that we've heard or the interactions that we've had with administration at the school about what parents expect in this particular school. See, clearly the worldly wisdom of envy and selfish ambition is alive and well in our area. And it leads to many evil practices in the world, like bigotry, racism, and pride, to name a few. So James wants us to steer clear of that kind of wisdom, that kind of living. He wants our knowledge and experience and practice in life to be fueled by godly wisdom and not worldly wisdom. Look again at what he says in verse 17. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Godly wisdom, also known as the godly way to live, to make decisions and experience life, is the opposite of the foundation of worldly wisdom that's rooted in envy and selfish ambition. Look at what James says here. We are called to live as pure and sincere people. This means that we are to live as people who have clean hearts. That we've rejected the advancement of the self. And by God's grace and transforming power, we are making progress to become less absorbed with our wants, desires, and expectations, and what will actually benefit others. This leads us to live pure and sincere lives that model things like humility, honesty, transparency with others. We have nothing to hide, and we have nothing to hide behind. These are the kind of people that are living out of a godly wisdom. Albeit nobody's perfect, right? But this is the work that God is doing in us. We are living as pure and sincere people. He goes on and he says, we are called to live as peace-loving people. And these things all sound great when you hear them. It sounds like, wow, those are great things that he said. A little more interesting when you dig in to figure out what these things really mean. When we're called to live as peace-loving people, this means that we care more about the relationship than we do about being right in the relationship. Right? We care more about the relationship than we do being right in the relationship. This means that we would rather be wrong and maintain peace than to be right, win an argument, and live in discord. Right? That's what it means to be peace-loving. It means that we do our part in pursuing peace, even if we are the one wronged. You can clearly see the opposite nature of peace to selfishness in this godly wisdom value, right? Very different than the way the world operates. He goes on and he says, we're called to live as considerate people. This means that we are always seeking to understand things from the other person's viewpoint. Right? Newsflash, there's always multiple sides or multiple angles to a perspective. That's why there's so much division in our world today. So much division even in the world of politics, particularly. Because people tend to be so focused in seeing things either this way or in this way. And there's a complete inability to try to understand that there are a lot of different ways to reasons why people get to the places that they are. Yet it's so much easier for us just to say, this is what I believe, and everybody else is wrong. But we're called to live as considerate people, that we are always wanting to be learners, right? We're not self-absorbed, so we don't come to a situation with a presumption that I'm the know-it-all, right? I come to a situation to be educated, to learn, to be considerate, to try to understand where other people are coming from. To not try to assume or assert power in a situation or control over other people. We care more about what it means to be considerate is that we genuinely care more about people than what they believe. Right? We care more about people than what they believe. We value that person's inherent value as a child of God over everything else, no matter what they've done, no matter what they believe. We show and model respect and value to all people because that's what Jesus does. He goes on and he says we're called to live as submissive people. This is a great word that we all love to hear today, isn't it? This is another godly wisdom value that attacks the worldly wisdom core value of self. We don't have to be right. We can willingly and lovingly put ourselves under the authority of others, even when those that we put our authority under may be hard to like or respect. We learn, and we can do this because we understand and we're growing in transformation to understand the teaching of Jesus that says that it is better for me to lose my life than to gain the world. That it's only when I lose my life and my rights that I actually find life. As much and as long as we try to control our lives, to assume control of our circumstances, to refuse to put ourselves under the authority of other people, to fight it until we're black and the blue in the face, the more we will continue to experience a life of death. Life is found in learning to die, learning to live in submission. And not just to other people around us, but primarily in submission to God. This is so difficult because remember, the self tends to be the primary problem in our relationship with God and with others. We think too much about ourselves. We value our personal identity, our personal rights, more than I would say than we should. We are obsessed with them. It's not throwing it out the window when you're being mistreated or and you're dealing with injustice, right? These are good places and times where the value of life and rights and things are very, very important. But you can also see how these things can be taken to an extreme and just become natural to our way of operation. And just assume that I'm going to naturally look out for myself. And so we learn to subdue the self and the self's need to be in charge and in control, because we don't have to look to the world and look to other people in the world around us and how they feel about us, how they think about us, how our success measures up to their success or not. Because what we know and realize is that our identity is rooted in God as a child of God. And when that identity forms the core of our basis, we begin to live into life. So we're called to live as submissive people. We're also called to live as he says, merciful people. This means that we aren't motivated by anger and hostility with a desire to see people get what they deserve. How quick we are to want to look at a situation and to start making judgments, right? It's so easy. I mean, just you can watch television, sports programs, news broadcasts, whatever it may be, and pictures are painted for us, and we naturally will make assumptions and judgments without all the facts. And we'll find ourselves leaning towards this way or this way. And typically what that means is that we're trying to find ourselves in a place of, particularly where we see maybe the underdog, kind of root for the underdog, and maybe the person in power, we might look at them and says, man, I hope they get knocked down a few notches. But we may not know completely what the context is. The heart of the matter a lot of times is that we are operating out of a very unmerciful way of operation. We sometimes, if you cut us at the core, we want to see bad people get what they deserve. We want to see them suffer. We want to see the arrogant go down in flames. It's a pretty dark way of thinking as well, isn't it, friends? Instead, we seek to be people who offer mercy. And we pray for people to see and experience God's mercy as we have. Who are we to cast judgment? Who are we to want to withhold or to see God's mercy withheld from people? It's hard when we recognize our full state as people and what mercy God has shown us. Sometimes we lose sight of that. Maybe I'm the only one that's guilty of that, but I assume there are others. We are also called, he says, to live as impartial people. This means that there is no room in our lives for things like racism or bigotry or class distinction for people who are experiencing and practicing godly wisdom. When we're experiencing, living in, and practicing godly wisdom, the Spirit is in the process of transforming us into people of impartiality. Again, this goes back to what we said from being considerate people. We value people's inherent dignity as a child of God, first and foremost, over anything else. Each person is valuable to God. Each person, no matter who they are, no matter what horrible atrocities they've ever done or continue to do, they are a child of God, a blessed human being created in God's image and likeness, who God desperately wants them to be rescued from whatever darkness they're in and to experience life. Oh, we have a long way to go to reflect that kind of mercy, love, impartiality towards all people. And so, again, we are called to live as pure and sincere people, and as peace-loving people, and as considerate people, and submissive people, and merciful people, and impartial people. When we live lives informed by this kind of wisdom, this godly wisdom, it results in often us making wise and right decisions in life. It results in leading us to experience life and peace and contentment within our circumstances and situations, no matter what they look like on the surface. And it also leads to others being blessed and benefiting from our use of this wisdom as well. How many people do you know that are positively affected by people operating out of a worldly wisdom of operation motivated by selfish ambition and envy? How many people do you know that are benefiting from that in a life-giving way, right? But then again, how many people do you feel could be positively benefited by the godly wisdom values coming from our lives of impartiality, being peace-loving, being considerate, being submissive, being merciful? As we learn to live within a godly wisdom way of life, we find that we not only come alive, but others experience life through us. This is the way of Jesus. And so, thank God, it ain't up to you and I to do it all on our own and try to manufacture it, right? Certainly these reminders of when I'm in situations, I can be more impartial. I can learn to be more considerate and sincere. I can be more humble in my approach or more transparent with my answers. Those are things that we can be reminded on, and we can make some course corrections in our lives to better model those things. The human will is not completely devoid of any ability to make changes. So those are some things that we can do. But lasting change, transformational change is done at the Holy Spirit level, at the heart level, where it doesn't have to be a work for us. It doesn't have to be something that we have to continually try to will ourselves to do. But the Spirit of God can do such a work in us that we can see that more of these godly wisdom values become more flowing from us as people. And when they're not, we come before God and we ask Him to help us, because likely there are worldly wisdom values of envy and selfish ambition that are getting in the way. Darren has become thinking too much about what he wants or doesn't want, or what somebody's done or hasn't done to him. He's focused on his own wants and his own needs, and as a result, I wonder why I don't feel as much compassion towards this person. And so I ask the Spirit of God, do your transforming work. Psalm 51, create in me a clean heart. Make me into a pure person. Give me your life and your light in me. Purify me from my unrighteousness. And lead me in your way of everlasting life. Help me to experience that internally and to express it externally. That should be our prayer. That's where we want to live. We will find no life living with values of envy and selfish ambition at the core of our operation. And we have to be honest, friends, that it's there. And it's there subconsciously or unconsciously. It will fight at you. Don't think just because you call yourself a follower of Jesus that the values of envy and selfish ambition are just gone. They are not gone. I promise you that. They are there, fully alive, like a ball and chain dragging around your leg, wanting to pull you back into slavery. But we ascribe and live by and have available to us a much higher power than the slavery of sin imprisonment. Right? We have the Spirit of God who longs for our transformation, who longs for His work to be developed and done within us, but will not force Himself on us. He will gently prod us. He will gently correct us as our hearts stay pure and open to His leadership. and how easy it is for us to follow the way of ourselves. How easy. And so, friends, part of the journey with Jesus is living into this desire, this reality on a day in and day out basis. Spirit of God, I recognize these things about myself, and I'm imploring you for your corrective discipline and work and transformation in me to make me new. And I promise you, as many of you can attest in your own life, as you look back, you can see progress. You can see where the values of envy and selfish ambition may have had a stronger foothold, but now, as you've surrendered yourself more and more to the loving care and leadership of the Spirit of God, you find more of these godly wisdom values taking a foothold in your life. And what's powerful is that even the times that they don't fully express themselves, you're probably becoming more aware of the fact that they aren't. That's a blessing. That's a gift. That is the Spirit of God showing us and showing you and I the way to life. You have tasted and seen that I am good. Now live there. Father, we thank you and we praise you for the work of transformation that you are doing in us. We know that we have not arrived. We are not there yet. We need these reminders along the way that remind us to die to self and to come alive in you. We recognize that many times very self-centered ways of operation form the basis of our decision-making on a day in and day out basis. And we recognize that that not only leads to death in us, but it leads to death for people around us. And so, Jesus, we ask for your Spirit's work to continue to do the work of transformation in us. That you would instill in us these godly wisdom values, these ways of operation, so that we can not only experience life, but that people around us can be blessed by you as well, can experience your life, your mercy, your grace, your healing, so that they too might be transformed as well. We ask for your help with this. In Jesus' name, amen.